Welcome to episode 346 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. What do customers think about greener delivery? And are they prepared to make greener choices when it comes to delivery options and online shopping? Kathleen Cauwelier, a PhD researcher at Mobilise, part of the VUB, joins me in a moment to discuss recent research she co-authored on this very topic. Joining me on the line is Kathleen Cauwelier. Kathleen is a PhD researcher at Mobilise, part of the VUB. Kathleen, welcome. We're going to talk about some research that you and the team published recently. It's called From Cart to Door, Unravelling Consumer Behaviour Through Attitudinal Sustainability Profiles. Kathleen, that's quite a title. Perhaps we start to unpick what all this is really about. Would it be fair to characterise the research as saying it's talking about the gap between what consumers say they want to do when it comes to sustainability and what they actually do? Is that a rough summary of what it's about?
Exactly. Thank you for having me. We're looking at how people say they want to act and then looked at their real behavior, like how they actually act. And so that's what we did in this research. We started by asking questions about what people think about sustainability, and then specifically in the last mile delivery within e-commerce. And then we also asked questions about their actual behavior, like how do they go pick up a parcel, or what do they choose for a delivery option. And then we compared both sides of the story, like their attitude, but also their actual behavior.
So this is called, you call it the attitude-behaviour gap, is that right?
Yeah, so the attitude-behaviour gap is when people have a positive attitude but don't really act on it. And so that's where there is a gap between the attitude and behavior. And so we found that also in last mile delivery, there is also like that attitude behavior gap.
So let's get a bit of background to the research that you've done. You started by surveying a number of consumers. So how big was the sample group and where were they?
So we had a survey group of around, or a sample of around 2,000 respondents, and they were all Belgian respondents.
And this survey was focused on, like you were saying, the attitudes towards environment, e-commerce and the last mile delivery. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what kind of things were you asking the survey respondents?
So we were asking questions about if they were willing to wait longer for a purchase, if they were willing to pay more, but also then more on a personal level, like is it important for them that the parcel they get is delivered sustainable, and like more to the personal self, to the individual self, to try to understand like, okay, it's important for the individual.
And I understand did you break it down as well by the size of the parcel as well? So instead of just asking what do you think about parcels, you're breaking it down to like the size or the weight of the parcels?
So at the beginning, and that was more for the actual behavior. We looked at like how does it differ if it's a light shipment, like less than 2 kilos, then less than 5, less than 10, and then 30, and then more than 30, and see a bit like, okay, is there a difference in how people want their package to be delivered?
So let's talk about some of the attitudes that you uncovered, or in particular, consumer attitudes towards sustainability when it comes to e-commerce. Can you give us an idea of some of the findings that you found, some of the highlights there, please?
So we did a cluster analysis, and the cluster revealed 4 clusters, and so we have about 20% of consumers that are the pro-sustainable consumers. So those are the consumers that it's important for them. They're willing to change their behavior. They believe that they have a responsibility. So on all the different factors we looked in attitude, they all had a positive score. Then there is about 20% that we call the careless consumer, and so those really they just don't care about anything. They don't think they have a responsibility. So that group is, I think, the most difficult one if we want to change behavior, because they really don't care. And then there is the last 60%, more or less, that is like neutral. And there we looked at, okay, because there are difference in the 60%. So we see about 30% that is uncommitted, and then 20% or like a bit more that is ignorance. So there, the difference is that with the ignorance consumers, it's more that they just don't know, and the awareness is not there yet. So they do believe that they have a responsibility, but they just don't see, or they're missing some more information and knowledge. The uncommitted consumers, they indicate a high level of awareness, so they are aware, or they think that they are aware of the problems of sustainability in the last mile delivery, but they have a slightly lower individual importance. So it's less important. They don't feel like they're as responsible for making other choices. And so those are the four groups we unraveled through cluster analysis.
When we're talking about these neutral consumers, is that the right term?
Yeah.
Then they're neither one nor the other. They're somewhere in between. Has the research shown that these are people who we need to communicate better with to understand what they could do? It's an interesting question for us in the delivery world, because we have to understand also, is it our responsibility as the delivery sector? Is it the e-commerce sector? I'm not going to ask you to answer that one, whose responsibility it is, but is that part of it that consumers need to, or would like to understand what their choices mean in terms of environmental impact?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of the puzzle. It's not going to solve everything, but there is a large portion that still needs more information and needs to understand how their choices impact sustainability. And so, yeah, that's definitely part of the puzzle.
Now, the aim of the research wasn't necessarily to say which delivery option is greener than the other. This was just to understand what the consumer's perspectives or what their understanding would be. Did you have any? Were there any outcomes or results from your study that showed or shed any light on consumers' willingness to pay for greener delivery? It's a vexed question for us in the delivery industry.
Yes. Yeah, we also looked at that. And there, yeah, the willingness to pay in our study is quite low. So around 20% is willing to pay more. And then when we looked more specifically at the socio-demographic factors, we saw that it was more the younger people that were, so the 18 to 35 that were more willing to pay more. But what we saw is that the willingness to wait longer is much higher. So people are willing to wait longer to receive a package. There's the acceptance is way higher than the willingness to pay.
So if we look for a way forward for us as a sector, there are always going to be questions for us with regard to how we measure the environmental impact of various delivery options and how we communicate that to consumers. And that's been the topic of a number of episodes of the podcast recently, talking about how we report this to consumers,
Yes.
and also then how that's reported to the e-commerce retailers themselves, and so on and so forth. So what can we glean out of this in terms of what can we learn in terms of what we need to do next? I mean, do we need to get more data about how people collect their parcels? Do we need to get more data about their own preferences? I mean, what can you see coming out of your research that we could learn in the delivery sector?
Well, first, I think more data about how people collect a parcel is important, because a lot of literature still treats it a bit as a black box, or doesn't really take all factors into consideration, or they take very strict assumptions about everyone takes the car, or there is no trade chaining, or stuff like that. And so I think more data would be beneficial to make better better sustainability impact calculations. Like if you do with the external cost, which is something we do quite often in our group, it's important to take all those factors into consideration. So that's definitely an important one.
Kathleen, returning for a moment to one of your earlier points, when you're talking about those clusters of consumers, the ones who are pro-environment, I think you called them the careless consumers, and then the 60% that's neither one thing nor the other. When you were interviewing and conducting all this research, did you find any actual difference in their behaviour, whether it's how they select their delivery options or how they collect their parcels or the delivery options that they choose?
So that was the most interesting part of the study, because we saw that there isn't a big difference. We see that the pro-environmental behavior slightly uses more soft mobility and more out-of-house deliveries, but in general, the 4 clusters all act the same way. The car is the most preferred delivery option. Home delivery is also the preferred option. So I think that was interesting to see that even though we have those clusters and those different attitudes towards sustainability, when we really look at the actual behavior and how they currently act and choose to get their parcel delivered, and the way they travel, if they get an out-of-house delivery or out-of-home delivery, the difference aren't that significant.
Why do you think that is? Why would it be that even though they say the pro-environment consumers, let's say that they want to be or make better environmental choices, their choices seem to be the same as everybody else? What do you think is behind that?
So yeah, I think that's the whole aim of my research, is trying to understand that, and trying to understand that attitude behavior gap that we see not only in e-commerce and sustainability and last mile delivery, but in all sorts of behaviors people have. So I don't really have an answer right now, but yeah, that's the aim of my study, trying to understand that.
This is a hugely important thing for us in the delivery sector, really, isn't it? The understanding what is the greenest option, communicating it to whether it's the end consumer or the e-commerce retailer, whoever we have to communicate it to, and helping them understand that so they can make the right decisions. Now, the flippant answer here, everybody, obviously, is the most environmental thing to do is to stop buying. But we live in the real world, so it's possibly not something that will be widely, embraced, shall we say. There are lots of questions for us, I think, in the delivery sector right now about this, and we need to continue asking those questions. And discussions like this with academics and researchers, I think, is hugely important. So, Kathleen, if people want to find out more about your work and everybody else at the VUB, the kind of research that's happening there, where should they go?
They could go to our website. It's mobilise.research.vub.be. We also have a LinkedIn for the Mobilise group, so they could also find us there and find what our group is doing in terms of that research.
I will include a link to the website and to the LinkedIn page on the episode page on thepostalhub.com. So if you haven't been able to note that down, go to thepostalhub.com, look for this episode page, and you'll see all the links there. Kathleen Cauwelier, PhD researcher at Mobilise, part of the VUB. Thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you.
Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, Alan Barry joins us to talk about major delivery sector trends and to talk about stamp free. Don't miss this or any of the other great episodes coming up soon on the Postal Hub podcast. Subscribe to the podcast in any or many podcast platforms such as Apple Podcasts. I nearly said Google Podcasts, but that doesn't exist anymore. Or any of the other ones that do exist. Subscribe and you'll get each episode downloaded to the device of your choosing as it's released, probably. You can also subscribe to the email newsletter that I have. I send out an email every time I release a new episode. Go to thepostalhub.com and you can sign up for the newsletter there. I also have the Daily Delivery Digest, of course, a daily newsletter with all the headlines from around the delivery world direct to your inbox every business day. Business day? Every working day. Every day that I'm working. How about that? If you want to contact me about anything at all, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.